One of the things I will always preach to all of my Commander content and my Commander players out there is you should be playing more interaction. Play more board wipes, but too many might just get a little oppressive, and play your single target removal, but make them be catch-all. So you don't need to play too many of them. The last thing you need is single target removal for artifacts and enchantments, but then you don't cover your planeswalker bases. Especially in blue, I love cards like Echoing Truth because, again, it is that catch-all that can also potentially be a board wipe against like token heavy decks. So cards like that really do have a lot of power in my mind, but they do have a lot of like anti-social effects to it. Because in some ways, a lot of players may want to end a certain game. If it's gone to a certain board state, they said, you know what, if we don't have it, we don't have it, you can win the game. But specifically, they mean have it as, are they going to win the game? They don't necessarily want a board wipe where everyone hard resets, which is kind of why no one really likes Farewell, because it doesn't really like end the game. It doesn't really push in a direction. It's just a hard reset, which isn't exactly where I think board wipe should be taken. And I'm hoping that's what the topic of today's video is going to be, where I look at another video by the Salubrious Snail titled The Problem with Board Wipes in EDH. And I'm hoping that this video doesn't really devolve into any type of anti-interaction type of thing. And I hope maybe it goes more into the social elements of things, where when it comes to, as I mentioned, board wipes and interaction, a lot of people want to forward their engine, really. They want to enact their game plan to make sure that they win, but they don't want it so everyone has to hard reset. No one wants to sit there with like 10 lands, 3 cards in hand, and nothing to do. That's not really the purpose of board wipes. And I think we should evolve our thinking around what it means to interact and stop what our opponent's doing, which is going to be the key to building your 99. Because if you have too many synergy pieces, you're going to find that you don't have the answers when you need them. And of course, there's ways and typo strategies where certain strategies are going to be better than others at answering artifacts. You may not need to play hard cards like Abrades, but you might be able to put that on something like a Goblin, which tend to be better than normal at other tribes in terms of dealing with artifacts, whereas other artifacts or other tribes might be better at dealing with like enchantments or planeswalkers. And so things like this like naturally work into the strategies that you're working into, but it's important to, again, complement the things that you're doing. Otherwise, you tend to just turn into like a CDH deck where you have the 2-3 interaction, you always have the interaction, and you have like 2 win conditions. You're like, I have an EDH deck. I'm like, no, you kind of just built like a 6 power level CDH deck. You know what I mean? Like you have to be careful with how you build out your interaction, because although I may push it, you still have to, you know, kind of move forward with your game plan. It's not just about winning with Demonic Consultation and Thassa's Oracle or like a slime against humanity, and then you exile like 25 copies with 1 slime out and you slam someone with the slime, right? You know, shout out to anyone that knows the reference to the deck that I'm talking about with that. But in my pause of watching One Piece right now, shout out to the Water 7 arc, by the way. Comment down below your favorite One Piece arc. Goated arc, by the way. I went over to Salubrious Snail's channel and we're going to talk about this video because I thought the title was really interesting. So let's hop right into it, into the problem with board wipes in EDH.
A few months ago, I had a brilliant idea. I'd make a tribal Gates deck with Child of Alara as the commander.
No,
I'd run 55 land.
Immediately. Okay. So, you know, we got Gates going, right? So we know we got like, you know, get the 10 Gates out, return that land to your hand, you win the game. All right. So that's probably going to be the baseline win condition. Child of Alara is the wildest commander to do this with. That's actually the wildest commander. I don't know what y'all think about Child, but like, it's definitely like a relic of like old commander design where you had these like really polarizing effects. Like commanders did like one thing, and it wasn't necessarily about like value or kind of hyper synergy. They just did this thing where like creatures got +1/+1, or you know, pay this much, reanimate a creature. Like it was very simple effects. Now you have like kind of word soup things where like, if you control a treasure and you finished high school math, then you get to rewrite the Declaration of Independence. Like, you know, it's just real nonsense conditions and stuff. And then they're like, you can only rewrite the Declaration once per turn. I miss this era of commander design. It's probably for the best it's not around though.
Along with a bunch of draw and ramp, with Mace's End, Crackling Perimeter, and a handful of beatdown options being...
Wait, hold on. Crackling Perimeter, tap and untap gate you control?
Win cons.
1 damage, you'll go.
A plethora of ways to sacrifice Child of Alara means that I should have board control mostly handled. Right. So I only need a mere 5 slots of the deck dedicated to interaction of all types.
Okay.
How efficient.
Right.
Finally, a few options for big life gain means that once my land count is up where I want it, I can heal up the damage it took me to get there. It's not a high caliber deck, but it certainly scratched my goofy deck itch, and it seemed pretty solid for what it was.
Honestly, goated.
Unfortunately, it was a terrible idea, chiefly because of the commander. Now, allow me to lay my credentials on the table. I am a cruel control player at heart. My first commander deck was Mono Black Ruin Your Day, with Shieldred as the commander.
Okay, I mean, comment down below what type of EDH player you are. I'm a dirty combo player at heart. Look, I may not play it in constructed, but I really like, I mean, I kind of express it through like my play and pauper, but even though I play a bunch of mill, I really love combo. Like, I like chaining multiple spells together, multiple cards coming together in synergy, whether it be 2 cards, 3 cards, 4 cards. Like, I love high synergy effects, combos, like whether it be game ending or just drawing you cards. Like, I love when things work together, right? And there is definitely a difference between synergy and combo, but the line is kind of loose. Like it's like synergy, like combo is like a subset of synergy, whereas synergy is this broad arcing term of many cards working together. But what people would consider combo is something determinate, like a win condition or like an end result, whereas synergy is just like something like Grey Merchant of Asphodel, where by itself, it's synergistic in a mono black deck. But a combo would be maybe some way to like blink it over and over, or like reanimate Massacre Worm or something like that. And whenever something dies, a token comes back. So when you reanimate the Massacre Worm, like there's always something to hurt, or I don't know, something like that.
My first deck I played with at Sanctioned Events was a standard Grixis control deck I built just after the release of Born of the Gods.
Oh, Lord.
And my favorite draft I ever played in was a Dragons of Tarkir draft, where I picked up 5 Flattens and 7 other removal spells and spent my night gleefully watching the...
You know how many times I've actually, every single time, just a fun fact, if I ever get y'all to do some trivia on me, here's a fun fact. I have only ever drafted Rakdos in draft because I'm so bad. In my mind, red is aggro, black is removal. That's amazing. I will draft Rakdos. That is all I've ever
Joy
drafted.
drained from my opponent's eyes as creature after creature bit the dust immediately after it was played. So when I tell you I want a commander that just repetitively Boardwipes to be a good idea, I mean it.
Okay.
But it's not a good idea.
Oh.
In the context of commander, Boardwipes are a type of effect that I would call asymmetric. This is confusing on the surface because they're generally literally symmetrical effects. You know, they destroy everything.
Right.
But what I mean here is that they impact different players massively differently.
Right.
Somebody playing a low to mid-power synergistic mid-range decks will feel them very brutally, but there are a lot of types of decks that just won't really care as much.
Right.
Boardwipes won't stop combos, they won't prevent aggro decks from abusing your life total, they won't slow down large land counts, and they won't shut down your opponents, generating a lot of instant and sorcery-based value. The best option my Child of Alara deck has for dealing with somebody suddenly winning is using one of the 2 counterspells within the deck, or preparing to instant speed sacrifice.
This looks like this is leading to a video where Boardwipes are kind of one-sided, and I've kind of thought about this as a reason for why a lot of folks like really hate mass land destruction, because it's like the great equalizer, right? Where a Boardwipe is perfectly fine. You still have the resources you need to kind of rebuild, and you tend to have like your mana rocks as well, depending on like if it's like a Wrath of God versus a Farewell. But you know, mass land destruction, you lose your resources. It is truly a great reset. It feels like, I don't know, I mean, socially, it feels like you spent all this time kind of building this board and now you've wasted it. But also on that sense, like being the grand equalizer of, you really don't have anything. Like everyone is equally affected. The combo player versus the elves player, stuff like that. So I'm wondering like if those 2 pieces kind of come together psychologically for people to really hate mass land destruction. And don't ping me for someone that's always playing mass land destruction. I'm just always going to be the player that's like open to it. If you tell me that's what your deck is doing, then I'm going to be more hyper aware and maybe save up a counterspell or 2 for something like that. But Salubrious here only having 1 counter, 2 counterspells.
And hoping I don't encounter interaction of any kind.
Oh no.
Okay, so the Child of Alara dependent game plan has some holes.
Yes.
Big whoop. I'm playing a Gates deck, man. No shit, my deck has some weaknesses. However, this is a bigger problem than it seems. Going back to the idea of the card being asymmetric, we can think about how it is experienced by the decks that are more vulnerable to it. And the answer is, it's hell. It sucks so hard for these decks. They can barely even start to build a board before they're staring down the barrel of another Child of Alara sack. Even if they deal with one of my wipes, as long as my ramp game worked out as intended, there will be another one immediately following it.
Exactly, yeah.
This is similar to the graveyard decks analogy from my last video. This deck will ruin the day of casual synergy decks, but against a less board-dependent deck, it'll putter around and be a mild nuisance before getting ultimately crushed.
Heal the Crocs.
With little to no chance of actually pulling off one of its win cons. Now, Child of Alara is the most extreme example of Boardwipes creating highly asymmetric game experiences, but this is an issue with Boardwipes as a whole. I talked a bit about my glitch.
What is the lore of Child of Alara? What is the lore? This giant self-destructing nuclear bomb of a child that's a 6/6 with trample. What is the lore of Child of Alara?
It's a deck in my mid-range video, and that deck operates as a kind of homage to the mono-black Shieldred deck I played when I was 15.
Love that.
Get card advantage and a ton of mana, and proceed to throw bombs and one-sided board wipes at the table until my opponents fold. Now, that deck is much more well-rounded than the theoretical Child of Alara deck.
Right.
It has a lot of single-target removal to deal with key threats, and a variety of win cons, which can all eliminate a threatening player much faster than...
Yo, Casualties of War is like one of those cards that, like, I think a lot of people, like, in lower power pods, like, they'll run because they're like, yo, I can destroy so much. And then kind of like mid power pods, they'll like remove, but then after some time, they may like put back in. Like having the ability to destroy one of everything is so powerful, especially when you can get it out like quote unquote on curve or like kind of in that early phase of the mid game. Like you can destroy, you know, someone's artifact that's like cheating out a bunch of creatures, and then you destroy the oppressive creature that's preventing commanders from being effective. Then you destroy, you know, the enchantment that's making everything cost more. You destroy the land that's creating a bunch of zombies. You destroy the planeswalker that's exiling graveyards. Like so many cards like actually do so. Like Casualties of War is like a goated card. Not enough people are playing it. And I think it's just because you have answers like Assassin's Trophy. You figure like, okay, if I can answer the one thing that's stopping me, that's great. But I think people forget like the politics of Casualties of War are great. Like you can be like, all right, you know what? I'm in a position to help you out. Are you willing to help me out in a turn or two? Casualties of War, bang, 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 bang. You know, I'm going to destroy the, that 2-mana artifact that makes it so if you cast a card outside of your own turn, it costs 3 more, defense grid. And like, you know, you look at the control player and you're like, hey, I can destroy that defense grid. I'm going to need that favor back. And maybe you could use it to tell someone to not counter one of your spells. Like these are the things that you got to be thinking about. But then also you're doing something like where you could create mass favor, where you could be like, okay, not only is the control player getting this stuff back, but now the graveyard player, the Ashiok's gone, the graveyard player, the ley line's gone, and like stuff like that. So there's stuff like that's really important.
Crackling perimeter. Nonetheless, the profile of how it fares against different decks looks very similar. I try not to pull out the deck against the low to mid-power mid-range decks that make up a decent portion of the decks in my playgroup, because it generally stomps on these decks in theatrical fashion. However, when my opponents have pressure to prevent me from fully greeting out, or counterspells for my massive mana investments, or combo wins to catch me and my mostly sorcery speed removal suite off guard, it's much worse. Against these sorts of plays, my deck ends up looking like one of the clunky mid-range decks that I usually crush.
Okay.
Before going further, I should take the opportunity to state that board wipes aren't bad overall. A lot of decks are heavily board-based, and it's good to have a solid way to deal with that.
Correct.
A better version of my Glissa deck would probably be running 3 to 5 board wipes instead of 8, with tutors to bridge the gap. Okay. But years spent as a mono-black player forced me into the hard truth that unconditional tutors are bland as hell, so I don't play them. Ultimately, the deck is what I want it to be, and I'll happily let it serve as a teaching point as happily as I'll play it.
And like that's like a hard thing for me too. Like I think a lot of people don't talk about this, but like when you kind of invest into like really powerful EDH cards, like you save up some money and you're like, I'm gonna finally buy that Mana Crypt. You know, a couple $100, you sit down, you're like, yes, I like hyperpowered my deck. And your immediate thought is that, especially because something like that is colorless, it can go on any EDH deck. Like you throw it into everything, you know, like I have a Great Henge that I splurged on once, but I had to force myself to only put it in one of my green decks, even though it would work in the other 2 that I have. right? Like it's fine, it works there, it adds some mana, it might not get the most optimal value, but like it's a good card. And so I forced myself to only put it in one. And I think that's like a really hard thing. I think it comes with tutors too, because it adds consistency, but you have to understand like why you're buying the card or why you're adding it, right? A lot of us, you know, may have many EDH decks, and so you can spread out your cards. Some of us have a few. I personally have like 5 to 6, and I like to keep that rotation. I don't really add many. I like to add like cards, and so it's really hard for me personally. I don't know. Let me know what you think. It's actually really hard for me to not just add all these universal cards. To, you know, I got a mana drain out of a pack recently, and just to like not add that in all of my blue decks and just be like, okay, I'm just going to put it in one blue deck. I don't need to be as oppressive or have the same game plan throughout. But my forcibles and subtleties, I'm putting that in every deck. Don't fight me.
The real thing I'm trying to convey here is the need to be mindful when constructing your deck. The interaction package of your deck and what things it's particularly good or bad against is something you should think about. Ideally, it should be well balanced, and if there are holes, they should be intentional rather than incidental.
I like that. Yeah.
As an example, my Myriad Equipments deck has very little hard removal. Burn and non-creature permanent destruction, yes, but not much for big creatures. This is mostly a matter of the fact that I'm playing an aggro deck, and I'm looking to get a substantial board presence early and be threatening life totals. The deck's removal serves to slow down my opponents and deal with pesky cards like Trigon Predator, but ultimately the deck's solution to later threats is to simply deal with the player, or politic around the threat for a while.
Right.
My deck's removal suite has a hole, but it's a calculated one.
Okay.
Another common hole in an interaction suite would be fast blue decks that choose to almost entirely run counters that don't target creatures. A choice motivated by the fact that most forms of interaction from their opponents are non-creature, and an Essence Scatter isn't going to help protect a turn 4 combo win. Right. As a final note, let's return to the idea of asymmetric effects. A lot of Stax effects and hate cards also fall under this label.
Right.
But Stax effects generally operate the opposite way as Boardwipes.
Is Scavenger Grounds really like a Stax effect? Sorry, the card behind me is Deafening Silence, so each player can't cast more than one non-creature spell a turn. But is Scavenger Grounds really a Stax effect? Is that like kind of consider that? Like I can see the rest of it. Thorn, Collector, Deafening Silence, sure. But like Scavenger Ground just feels like a good card. Like it just feels like one of those utility cards. Like obviously the lands decks like the Lord Windgraces are going to crop rot for it and everything. Like it's great in those decks as like a utility card. But is that like, I don't think Scavenger Ground's just like a great utility card. Like when does a card like pass that threshold? I don't know.
Choking out burstier strategies that carefully plan out their resources to execute a specific game plan, while having less of an effect on a deck whose game plan consists of play Tree Folk or something. There's a reason why running a bunch of Stax effects is a better idea than running a bunch of Boardwipes. The sorts of decks shut down by an Archon of Emeria are generally stronger and more carefully constructed than the sorts of decks shut down by a Plague Wind. You can build a deck with a bunch of Stax effects.
But see, that depends on the pod you're in. Because, okay, yeah, they're more powerful, right? So I can agree with that statement. I'm just trying to kind of push back on the, I guess, the extrapolation of that. So you're right. The more powerful decks, the CDH decks, like the 8, 9s, 10s of the world, are going to be more affected by the Archon. But in that sense, the lower power decks will actually just be more affected by the Plague Wind, because they will play more to the board. They'll play with their creatures. They'll try and work with combat. Like the amount of times where I played maybe like a lower power pod and like really noticed the difference, like especially someone that maybe like likes to kind of bump between maybe not CDH, but like 8s and 9s and like 6s and 7s, you really see the stark difference between how many times like combat matters more in the lower power tables. So I guess like watching this, like don't extrapolate the fact that, you know, one is better than the other. It's just better in a different context. So like what he's saying is correct. Just be careful about like, you know, depending on the pod you are in, you don't necessarily want to be playing Archon. That slot in your Orzhov or whatever plus deck, your black-white plus deck, it might just be better to play Plague Wind or like a Damnation or like another, you know, whatever board wipe in there.
And a win plan that can outrun a mid-range deck. But you can't build a deck full of board wipes with a win plan that can outrun a combo deck. And if you build
also, yo, back up because the video is about to end. If you have those top 5 cards right there, if you have those on the battlefield against me, I'm calling the police. I'm calling the police. I'm calling the police. You're going to jail. There's no way, because there's no way. No. If you have all 5 of those out on the battlefield against you, I'm calling the police. It's just...
I can outrun a combo deck. And if you build a deck that massacres casual mid-range decks, but flails around against everything else, you're going to be struggling to create interesting and dynamic games.
Okay, yeah, so the video kind of ends there. So I see what he's saying, and this is kind of like tackling this from the social perspective that I was kind of alluding to, where, yes, at the end of the day, it's really important to make sure that you're board wiping for a reason. And it shouldn't necessarily always be for a hard reset, because sometimes like you're an hour into the game. Like I have played multiple games, and let me know in the comment section down below if you think this is okay or not. I played multiple games where I have maybe had the answer to stop my opponent from winning, but we are also then in a state where we may not necessarily be able to keep up or like catch up, win the game or something like that. And I've let my opponent just win, because it's not valuable to just extend the game for the sake of extending the game. This isn't constructed where your deck is necessarily like hyper synergistic. There's multiple copies of cards. You're playing a singleton format. And so obviously you have like redundancy pieces and everything, but I've been in multiple states where I may not be winning the game, or I don't need like one more turn. So I would rather the game end. I do have the Cyclonic Rift. I do have the Miscast. I even have the Teferi's Protection, but I'm just going to let them have it because I don't have the ability to then follow up and win the game. And so that's what I think a lot of people miss. They just interact for the sake of interacting. And then they kind of add like a further feel bad psychologically, where I feel like, you know, it's like, oh, I interacted. I did everything I could, but we still lost. Well, like, no, we didn't necessarily do. You just kind of like threw a stick at a giant. Like, it's like, oh, I did everything I could. Well, was that really useful though? But if you are able to win, you know, if I was able to cast the Force of Will to stop them from winning, because if I just go back to my turn, then my creatures can go off, then that's valuable. That's something different. But I think in a case like this, it kind of adds that board wipe factor of like, if you were to cast this Farewell, does it actually help you win the game? That's what you need to ask yourself. And I think that is good logic, right? Because at the end of the day, like Commander is really just about the gathering portion of things, right? It's really about the social dynamics of the game. And that's what we see from the rules committee right now. And I'm definitely going to make a video next week about like kind of the rules committee's recent statements. Like there's been some kind of ideas or controversy about something that Jim said on Twitter. Maybe not controversy, just a lot of conversation around it. Kind of just waiting on the whole kind of ban around constructed. Next week is just going to be a whole big constructed week once that BNR happens. But I think in general, promoting the social aspects, promoting better games and bigger moments adds to someone's experience in a casual pod. You know, this kind of changes when it comes to CEDH, but again, these are the type of things that you want to be thinking of. And I don't think like Salubrious really said it outright. I think some of the points could have been a bit more concise, but I understand what he's saying. So I'm hoping maybe again, I'm just creating my own narrative. I like what he's saying, and I'm hoping to just kind of say it out right there. If he didn't kind of outright mention it there, but I like the message in general. The Child of Alara deck is just, it's kind of funny. I see why, like if you're going to be dirtling around with gates, you might as well just have like a board wipe. Like, oh, y'all doing too much. Let me continue to win. What a crazy commander. I don't know. Anyway, shout out to this video is going to be linked down below. Let me know what you think. No, this was a great one. This was a great one.